we're starting. Okay. Building some time for interpreters together. And the booth.
It's not turned on, perhaps.
Right, so our interpreter's ready. Oh, this is really. I can't send this out of my phone. So allow me to go speak in here. Yeah, no, Okay, everybody's ready. Should we start? Okay, Mr. Julio, are we ready? Recording? Are we on? Okay, guys, so we're gonna move on with the last lecture of the day before our network panel. We have Demolidor, who has written the language hacking methods for different languages. I don't know if you're familiar with it. He's a famous polyglot YouTuber, polyglot, and the author of this Fluent in 3 Months series and language hack series as well, which has been translated to Portuguese and other 15 languages. He's a National Geographic Traveler of the Year, has given multiple TEDx talks, and he is also an European Union Official Language Ambassador and has been completely nomadic for over 21 years, right? Okay, so just a little bit on the theme of this lecture, which is entitled Daredevil Language Learning, Turn Your Weakness into Strengths, right? I think I should read a little bit.
No, let's.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Good afternoon. You can go to the next slide. So, yeah.
Oh, sorry.
So very quickly, who am I? Like he said, I published a bunch of books. If I do this, can you go to the next slide? Yeah. I have a blog with 1 million readers a month, so I've been doing that for a very long time. Yeah. I'm a National Geographic Traveler of the Year. I've been nomadic for 21 years. And this year, for instance, I've had multiple projects in South America. I've traveled about 25,000 kilometers, all by land and by boat. So I've done a full circle of South America from Brasilia in February, went south, down all the way through, well, first through Cuiabá, then through Paraguay and Argentina and Chile. I got a flight up to Peru, and then from Peru, I went the entire Amazon River all the way to Belém, and then I got the bus from Belém to here. So I would love traveling. I'm always traveling, and of course, the theme of my travels tends to be around learning the local language. So I've learned a bunch of languages, and this has been a big passion of mine, although it's only been in my adult life. My background is in electronic engineering. I could only speak English when I was 21 years old. But it's been a fantastic source of inspiration for me that I've met so many people in so many different polyglot events, and I try to inspire those who want to get into language learning themselves. So I've done that through the likes of speaking at things like TEDx and a bunch of other conferences. Yeah. So today I want to talk about Daredevil language learning. So everything I just said may sound impressive, and you may think that maybe I've got a bunch of natural advantages that make me find language learning easy. But in today's talk, I actually want to talk to you about how bad a language learner I am, how bad I should be, how many disadvantages should have pulled me back. And I'll give you very specific examples that are relevant to me personally. And I'm hoping you'll expand this to challenges you face in your own life and kind of come up with a philosophy of how you can think of your own weaknesses as strengths. And I get a lot of inspiration from this from my favorite Marvel superhero, Daredevil. And Daredevil, I think Demolidor in Portuguese, he is blind. He's a blind superhero, but he still fights crime. And I find that so much more inspirational than the likes of Superman, who's just born an alien with great powers, or the Flash, who just gets struck by lightning and instantly becomes fast. This superhero is much more inspirational because he has a genuine disability that holds him back, but he finds strength in that disability. And part of his backstory is that he learned how to tune into his hearing, and through his hearing, he can fight crime. So this is the way I like to think of things that should have stopped me in my tracks in my life, that should have prevented me from achieving my dreams. I like to see, well, what can I see as an advantage in that? So for one of them, I went to speech therapy a lot when I was growing up. I was very sick, and because of that, I was held back. I was in hospital for a while, and I wasn't able to go to school with other kids. So up until the age of 10 years old, there were multiple sounds in my native language of English I could not produce. One of them, for instance, was the letter R, very famous for non-English speakers to learn, but I found it difficult. And to this day, my brother still teases me that my favorite TV show when I was growing up was Star Trek. Because that's how I pronounced it. I couldn't say Star Trek. It was Star Trek. And I spoke a lot like that in many different instances. So this was a huge setback for me in my life. But when I think back on that, this has actually helped me in so many ways. Because when I talk to a lot of people who get into language learning, I've noticed some of them have a different way of looking at it compared to me. And one of the reasons for that is because they have this idea of their own language being on a pedestal. Throughout their entire life, they've been able to communicate effectively in their mother tongue. They've always sounded like a confident native speaker. This is not the case for me. I am used to the fact that my schoolmates would have teased me because I spoke weird. I'm used to the fact that it took me a lot of practice to finally get that R. I had to go to many therapy sessions to make it work. So when you think about that in language learning, this meant when finally in my 20s, I got into learning languages and I came to sounds that I did not know how to pronounce. You know, for instance, Portuguese, you have the sound in boom, or in Spanish, you have the R, rolled R. We don't have those in English. I had to learn them. But the difference is, when I learned them, I didn't have a chip on my shoulder. I didn't think to myself, it's too late for me to learn this. I'm too old to learn these sounds. Because I learned how to pronounce the letter R when I was 10. And that should maybe change my way of viewing the world. So thanks to my speech therapy, I went into language learning accepting that there's still going to be a learning process, but I know I can do it because I remember doing it. Whereas most people don't remember learning sounds in their native language. I remember learning sounds in my native language. So that weakness of speech therapy and not being able to pronounce my native language sounds was a strength that made me a better language learner. And that's me when I was taking my speech therapy lessons. Okay, so another one is being Irish. Now, I wouldn't necessarily say being Irish is a weakness, but you know, it's a strength. Ireland's the best country. But there is one way that it set me back. So in Ireland, we have a particular way of speaking. So even when I got over my speech therapy issues, there was still something that was going to hold me back. And that's that we don't have the sound. So if I want to say, in Ireland, we say 33 trees, not 33, it's 33. And we have a lot of different things like that, like the word fiumi, Portuguese. I pronounce that in Ireland as film, because film. It's still spelled F-I-L-M, but we say film. because in Ireland, we don't put consonants together like that. It's not something we do like other native English speakers would. So again, this meant that as a 21-year-old, I couldn't say a lot of these sounds. And again, I got teased for it. My first job ever abroad was a mathematics teacher in the United States. And of course, I had to say the number 30 or 30. I had to say that a lot. So I had to train myself. But another way, when you turn that around and you think, what's the advantage? So one advantage is what I've already said, is I learned as an adult to pronounce sounds. I've already covered that. But there are certain ways we speak in Ireland that's made other languages easier for me. So for example, something which Brazilians or Portuguese speakers will appreciate is in Ireland, we never say the words yes or no. And it's because a lot of the ways we think about language are influenced by the Irish language, the language that is indigenous to Ireland before the British came and introduced English. So because of that, there's no yes or no in Irish. So if you ask me a question in English, and I would speak more naturally, not more international English, I would simply repeat the verb of the question. Do you speak Portuguese? I do. Can you swim? I can't. I wouldn't say yes or no. And it's similar in Portuguese. Você fala português? Fala. You don't say sim. And because of that, adjusting to that in Portuguese and in other languages, like Mandarin, does the exact same thing. They don't have a word for yes or no. They repeat the verb of the question. So because of coming from Ireland, that has been an advantage for me. And even very random things, like the word for God in Irish is spelled D-I-A. You know how that's pronounced? Gia. Exactly like in Portuguese. So the way we say hello in Irish is Gia Gitch. And the second word is a little harder to spell, but the first word is D-I-A, and it's pronounced exactly like you would pronounce the word day. So it's very random, but of course, if I was more of a pessimist and a negative person, I could say, man, being Irish held me back. I had to learn how to say in my 20s, but I see the strengths in that. So another challenge I've had to face is I am half deaf. And for certain periods in my life, I've been tethering towards being clinically deaf. And I've gone through 6 surgeries in both of my ears. And for periods of time, my life was as if I was just covering my ears the whole time. So not deaf as in I hear nothing, deaf as in it's like my ears are covered. And this, of course, has been a huge challenge as it comes and goes because I have difficulty understanding what people are saying. And that sucks. And if anything, that's a lot closer to Daredevil because he was blind and I was kind of teetering towards being half deaf. I'm the half deaf superhero, you know? So there are certain advantages of that because I've had to deal with this in my whole life. So I wrote my undergraduate thesis when I studied engineering on this thing. It's called trellis coded modulation, a very technical thing. But ultimately what it comes down to is when information is transferred over the internet or even over basic telephone lines, there's a certain redundancy that's included in that information. And that redundancy means that if certain parts of that information is lost, you could still piece it together at the end. And this is necessary in all forms of modern communication because even a perfect connection is going to lose a little bit of information. Not every 0 and 1 has to be necessary because at the end you can still make the perfect audio file or video file or whatever it may be. So this is built into our engineering systems. And with that in mind, I like to think that there is a certain redundancy in language. And I've embraced this a lot more because of my hearing issues. So as an example, if I'm learning a language and I'm just barely getting started with vocabulary and I only understand a word or two in a sentence, and all I hear is somebody say, blah, 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 dinner, blah, blah, tomorrow. Many people in that situation would just say, I didn't understand that. I'm just going to say, I don't know what you said and move on. But because of my background and understanding that I am not going to understand a lot of what's said because I'm just not going to hear it, I'm a lot better at extrapolation. I've naturally become the kind of person that I don't hear half of what you say, so I'm going to guess the parts I didn't understand. So if you said blah, 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 dinner tomorrow, I'm going to guess you're probably saying, do you want to go out for dinner tomorrow? You're probably inviting me. And so I will move the conversation along with that presumption. If I'm wrong, and I've been wrong many times, both in language learning and in my native language, because I didn't hear correctly, then I make a mistake. And I live with that. And it's fine. The world doesn't end, you know? I've made many mistakes. The earth doesn't open up and swallow me whole if I'm supposed to say yes when I said no or whatever it is. So this has been another advantage. And what I want to talk about a bit more in depth is I have ADHD. What's that? TDAH. Yeah. So this has been a huge setback in my life in so many ways. I got a big bunch of points here. Yeah. So lower dopamine levels means I can't be stimulated very well for a very long amount of time. I need a lot more engagement and I get distracted way easier. So if I want to study, it's so hard to stay engaged with study material. My memory is terrible. You tell me the translation of a word and 5 minutes later, it's gone out of my mind. I can't really multitask very well because I'll try to do one thing and I'll lose track of the other. And that makes it very difficult to do things like learning languages. I'm very bad at planning things out. People with ADHD are terrible at understanding timelines and how long something should take. So I would guess, oh, I only need to study this for an hour, and then I'd spend the whole day on it and still not make any progress. And then another thing that's very built into a lot of people with ADHD is from school, you're used to guilt. You feel a lot of guilt from making those mistakes or from acting out in class. Like I would find all of my school classes boring. And it's not because the material was boring, it's because I needed stimulation. Just it's built into the kind of brain that I have. And I got into a lot of trouble for that. And I would be constantly made to feel like I'm a bad person, I'm a bad student. I should try harder. No matter how hard I try, my brain just isn't built to work like a lot of people. So that affected language learning. Yeah. That affected language learning through things like, I can't really do passive learning. A lot of people have recommended maybe having the TV or the radio on the background. I can't do that. If something doesn't have 100% of my attention, I'm not going to retain it. I can't study for long periods of time. When you're learning a language, ideally 2 or 3 hours will make you help you get a huge stride forward in what you're trying to achieve with your language goals. I can't do that. I can't study for longer than a half an hour. This has been a huge setback. And then, like I said, I have the active memory issues. Yeah. But there are advantages to ADHD. So because of my planning issues, I've learned to work with my own challenges and I create buffer zones. And one of the biggest things of a lot of the setbacks I face, but especially ADHD, is I am a lot less of a perfectionist than a lot of people. I expect the world to be chaotic. I expect something to go wrong because things pretty much always go wrong in some way for me. So I take it a lot more in my stride. I expect to make mistakes. And in language learning, this means as I've gotten into it, for a lot of people, those mistakes are the reasons they can't push forward. It's because they're saying, I can't conjugate this verb, I'm forgetting all those words. And for me, it's like, how could a universe where that doesn't happen exist? Like, of course you're going to make mistakes. It's just so natural for me. So I plan for that. And I have thicker skin when I make those mistakes. When I try to say something and I forget the word, it's so natural to me. I have a lifetime of being, excuse my language, a fuck up. I have a lifetime of that. So I'm cool with it being incorporated with my language learning. And I'm much more likely to try many different things. Like I said, I can't focus on that one thing, but I can try multitude of things. So as an example, I've had a lot of jobs in my lifetime. I am currently a blogger. I have been paid to be a speaker. I've written a bunch of books. I have been a professional translator. I started traveling with that for a while. I've been a consultant on Skype, a youth hostel receptionist in multiple different countries, an English teacher, of course, a mathematics teacher in the United States. I studied electronic engineering, so I've had part of that. My first ever job when I was 12 years old, I was the only guy in my entire town who could use a computer. So they hired me and I helped a guy invest his money on the FTSE 100 British Stock Exchange. And it's because I didn't care. I was like, I know how to use a computer. I'll just go ahead and give it a try. Tech support, because of my computer skills, I worked at the computer shop in my town when I grew up. And then this thing, I know it looks weird. This is called a laryngeal mask array. It's put on your larynx after surgery. I had to spend a whole summer cataloging the world's literature on this stupid device that I hate so much because I've had to think about it so much. I was a race car controller, so I know this is Mario Kart, but I actually worked for real race cards, and I would have to help people as they got into the race cards and explain the rules to them. And I even was the manager of a yoga store. I didn't know anything about yoga, but I arrived in California, and the Californians found my accent so soothing. They didn't care what I said. And I would just say, the Zen in this yoga mat is very feng shui, so you should buy it. And that worked for some reason. I was a first aid assistant. So I've had many different jobs, and I thank that to my ADHD in trying so many different things. So because of another advantage is hyperfocus. So ADHD is famous for having your focus distributed, but when you find a passion, you are absolutely dedicated to that thing. It is your world. So I've tried to channel that into language learning. And I've found ways that, okay, I'm not the kind of person who can sit down and study a grammar book. I've come to peace with that, but there are other ways I can help my language skills. Like I like scrolling through TikTok. So I created 14 TikTok accounts for each of the languages I want to practice. And I switch into the other account and I only see the content in that language. And I try to post in that language. And I found other ways. I like playing video games. So I'll change the language of the video game. If I'm relaxing with Netflix, I'll change that language. Whatever I'm trying to do, I'll see, can I do this in my target language? And I've learned to hone that hyper-focus to turn it into an advantage. And of course, I use methods like the Pomodoro technique. Like I said, I can't study for long periods of time. You just can't escape that. You have to study if you want to really get to those C levels in the language. It's unavoidable. You can't just speak your way to fluency. So I have to study. So I found this method where you only allow yourself 25-minute segments to try to make progress in whatever you're learning. And I have a timer, and after 15 minutes, I'm like, I need to get up. I need to like run around the house or like pet the cat or something like that. But I see the timer and it says 10 minutes left, and I can push through. I can make it 10 minutes. I can do this. So seeing a Pomodoro timer has been essential for me to get 25 minutes of study done. And then I allow my ADHD brain to take over, and I go outside and I watch the birds for 5 or 10 minutes, and then I come back and I try to study again. Because of this, I have made that an advantage. Those 25 minutes, I get solid time out of them, and I can study in short bursts where a lot of people may not be able to do that. I always have my Anki ready to go. If I'm waiting in a queue somewhere in a supermarket, I'll take my phone out, I'll get solid study done, whereas somebody who needs to be in the zone for several hours may not be as comfortable with studying that way. Yeah. So these are some of the advantages. Another one is optimism, because like I said, I've expected things to go wrong in so many ways that it's just eased my way of looking at life. That I will just see, okay, the world is going to hell, but what's the positive side of this? You know, this language is so hard, but what's the easy thing? And this is one of the reasons my blog exploded, is because I kept writing posts about why German is easy, why Hungarian is easy. That post went super viral because that's just my philosophy. If it was Hungarian is so hard, there's like 13 cases. And I looked at it and I was like, they're not really cases. They're just, you put the postposition at the end of the word, it's fine. And I would reframe my way of looking at the language through optimism. And of course, I'm not lying when I say a language can be easy. I just find when people say, wow, German is so hard, wow, Chinese is so hard. I just look at that phrase and I'm like, this philosophy is completely worthless. I don't see how could this possibly help me in my life? That finding something hard. I don't care about that. You may find it to be true, but I want to find out, why is this easy? What are the ways I can think of the Pareto principle? What's the 20% of the work I can put in that will get me the 80% of the results? And that's come from this whole philosophy. I could be a bit more, it's like I said, I have problems with memory. So I used a lot of mnemonics. I'd come up with little stories to remember and to make associations between words. And I'll do that a lot easier because of my ADHD. And like I said, I have a long list of weird jobs. I've been to a lot of different countries. I can be more outgoing thanks to my ADHD, that I'm impatient and I want to stand up and talk to somebody. So that's made me better at having conversations. And I still remember when I took on a project learning Czech way back in 2009. I don't speak it anymore, but at the time I got it up to very high A2. I could have basic conversations after just 3 months. And I remember I was out with a bunch of people and there was a Brazilian lady with me and her Czech was significantly better than mine. It was her, she had been doing it for years. I think maybe learning Czech for 10 years. She could translate words like this without even think about it. She knew all the complex grammar. But we hung out, her, me, and a bunch of Czech people. And at the end of the night, they said my Czech was better than hers. And objectively, it wasn't. If we took a test, it wouldn't have been. But my confidence in saying caveman Czech, sounding like Tarzan when I spoke Czech, didn't matter because I was smiling, I was laughing, and I was moving the conversation forward. And this made it seem like I was a better language speaker than somebody who was definitely objectively better than me. And this is a large part of my language learning story. And I've created systems for everything. Because I have a problem that I'm going to reach, I expect that to happen. And I think people who are too much of a perfectionist in life, when a problem happens, that stops them dead in their tracks. My world is problems. So because of that, they're not unexpected. I just say, okay, here's a problem. How can I get around this problem? Oh, that solution doesn't work. I'll try this. And because of that, I move forward. And I think if you go through life thinking, as soon as a problem comes, that's a brick wall stopping you from being able to move forward, that's going to hold you back so much. So I think a little bit of accepting the chaotic world that we live in is going to change so much about how you learn things like languages. And I have shorter milestones. I'm most famously known for my blog, Fluent in 3 months. The reason for that is because that's the only way I can think about it. I need a 3-month goal. And I tried to make that as realistic as I could within my limitations. And I accept there are things I'm not going to be able to do within those 3 months. But because of that, I had that intensity and I would learn a lot in a very short amount of time. And I thank that to my ADHD. So very quickly, there are other ways you can think of advantages. Like if you have dyslexia, you have issues with reading. Well, maybe that makes you so much stronger at your listening skills. And this is something I am very bad at. Whenever I've taken the official European Common Framework tests, the weakest section for me is always the listening section. I have a lot of problems with focusing and getting the right answer, where someone with dyslexia is going to have a lot of a stronger core when it comes to processing the language audibly. So that's going to be your strengthness. Maybe if you're shy, you're not as outgoing as somebody like me, there are strengths in that. This means that you, like I because I have those listening comprehension issues, which are in large part thanks to my ADHD, problems focusing, it means that when someone's talking to me, it takes a lot of effort for me to try to focus on what they're saying to make sure I can move that conversation forward. But if somebody is less outgoing, they're going to hear that person a lot easier, and you're going to be a much better listener. And that's going to help you and make you so much more powerful than somebody like me. You might think, I wish I was more outgoing, but outgoing people have a lot of challenges that make a lot of social interactions challenging in their own different ways. And maybe if you have no money, that is not necessarily as, like, I went through a lucky period for about like 3 years where I made a lot of money from my blog. I'm back to regular income now, but when I made that money, I could think to myself, I'll just throw money at this problem. I'll just hire a personal coach who can help me solve this. I'll hire a language learner 3 hours a day. And I've learned through all of that that you can't, that thinking you would solve this problem with money is not going to make it happen. There's a lot of power in free applications and free meetups, in the basic material you can get through a quick Google search. That stuff is so much more powerful than the most expensive courses that you may be seeing out there. So the money issue is not what's necessarily holding you back. Maybe the innovativeness that you're going to have to find those free resources is going to make you try even harder. And if you can't travel, for a long time, I was very lucky. I have been very lucky. I've been a digital nomad since 2003. I have been able to move to the country. But there's a catch. The first time I did this, I moved to Spain. I lived in Spain for 6 months and I learned no Spanish because I gravitated towards other English speakers or Spanish speakers who wanted to use me to practice their English. And I met a lot of Brazilians in Dublin. I always joke that the second easiest place for me to practice my Portuguese in the world is Ireland. Because I go to Dublin, there's a lot of Brazilian communities who don't really know how to speak English, even though they've been living there a long time, because they've made these protective bubbles. So traveling to the country does not solve your problems when it comes to language learning. I always think it's not about your latitude and your longitude, it's about your attitude. So I have learned my best languages before traveling. I've created digital immersive environments, virtual immersion, where I listen to live streamed radio to try to get the audible listening rights. I'll get as regular as I can afford lessons with a teacher on Zoom. I'll use my social media and I'll be scrolling and trying to live that language as much as I can, so that when I do go to the country, I'm more in practice mode rather than starting to learn the language. So travel is not your solution. You're a better language learner before you travel. So that is pretty much everything I wanted to talk about. You can find me on the social medias. These are just my English and Portuguese accounts. And if you guys have any questions, if we have any time, let me know.
I did this in my question. Do you have some time for questions, comments, anyone?
The age-old question, how many languages do you speak? So my most confident languages are Portuguese, Spanish, Italian, Esperanto, French, German, and Irish. And then I can get by confidently in American Sign Language, Mandarin, Dutch, and a few other ones. And it always depends on how much I'm maintaining that language at the moment. So obviously at the moment, because I've been in South America this year, my Spanish and Portuguese are much better than they would be, but then in a year or two, they may go down a bit. So it's a constant juggling act.
Wow.
And remember, I only spoke English when I was 21 years old. Very important to remember that.
How is the acceptance of people regarding your learning in 3 months method?
Yeah, I've got a lot of misunderstandings about that, because when you say something like fluent in 3 months, that is understood by a lot of people as different things. A lot of people interpret fluency to mean perfection, but I have a lot of specificity when I'm going into my language goals. And for me, fluency means B2 on a European Common Framework. So upper intermediate level. And it's very important to define all the things you can't do, even if you're fluent. So you can't have deep philosophical conversations. I can't debate Kantian epistemology after 3 months. I will have an accent. I will still make mistakes. Someone at a B2 level still makes mistakes in the language. So when you accept all of that, it becomes a lot easier. And then on top of that, because of the nature of my work, I'm able to work very intensively for 9 months in the year, save up money, and then make language learning literally my full-time job, where I can do it for 8 to 10 hours a day. Then making a lot of progress in 3 months becomes a lot more realistic. So I've gotten a lot of confusion, got loads of arguments on Reddit. Those guys hate me on Reddit. And no matter how many times I try to explain myself, it never ends up well. So yes, I've definitely gotten a lot of stress out of that.
Hey, Benny, awesome presentation, by the way, awesome speech. Great job. I just wanted to ask you, working in all these jobs, speaking all these languages, man, like if you're not like being invasive, how old are you?
42. The secret is moisturize every day.
Thank you very much.
So you have been traveling for 21 years, and is there anywhere you are still going to? What countries are missing?
Oh, there's a lot of countries missing because despite what I've said about speed and 3 months and all of this, I still have a certain level of slow pace built into my life. So after 21 years, I've been to 46 countries, which is a lot. It's more than most people in the whole world. But keep in mind, there are 193 countries, depending on how you count them. So there's a lot of places I haven't been. But when I travel as intentionally as possible. That's why this year I've been trying to visit every single state in Brazil. And I just came from the likes of Acre, Rondônia, Roraima, and made my way through all of that northern part of Brazil. Last year I was in South Korea. And one way to keep my interest in Korea is every day, rather than getting a Korean lesson, I got a K-pop dance lesson in Korean. And that kept my attention. And I had to follow along with what they were saying. And that really helps you to focus in on what you're doing. So I try to have a project like that every time I travel. And if I was traveling quickly enough, I have friends who have visited every country in the world. But they have a very different style of travel to me. They're monolingual. So they will very typically not only meet people in the tourist industry. They may catch a country if they've only been there for a day. That still ticks the box for them. Whereas for me, like for the longest time, I almost didn't want to count Argentina because I was only in Buenos Aires. So I went back this year and I visited many different parts of Argentina. But for long, I didn't count Argentina. Whereas most people, especially if they're in a country for 3 months, would absolutely count it. So yeah, I travel slowly. I still have plenty of other projects I want to, there's a lot of the world to see. There are a lot of things to do. And I am excited about any kind of projects I can think of.
Hi, Benny. Hi, Benny. First of all, congratulations for your presentation. That was awesome. And in many parts of your life story, I'm fully acknowledged and I'm fully aware of this because I'm also ADHD and Asperger. And so the same struggles that you have, I also have in my life, even as a polyglot. Let me say something about your venture, the 23 months. Acquiring even a B1, a lower intermediate, in 3 months, it's kind of, the difficulty is real, it's not as linear as it seems, it's related to the language you are learning. For example, I learned Catalan in only 6 weeks, achieving B1 and B2 in 3 months, but I struggled with that up to 3 years to achieving a B1. When we talk about Magyar, the Hungarian language, you talk about 12, 13 cases, but I picked up the prepositions are only suffixes. There's no case exactly. Well, in the Basque language, there are 18 case suffixes. For me, I thought that they are only preposition suffix. Okay. Even though the Basque language was so complicated, but I mastered a B1 in 3 years. So the difficulty, I mean, the language acquiring level is related to the language if you're learning, even if it's not an non-Indo-European language. So how do you, the question, how do you do within your venture in 23 months, how to achieve a B2 level in 3 months, regardless language? Thanks.
So it depends on the realism. So like you said, going from one Romance language to another Romance language is way more realistic. Even going to a Germanic language coming from English has a certain set of advantages. But I like with Basque, it's obviously in a completely different branch, but there would still be certain advantages. There are, like, it's impossible to start any language in the world from zero. Every language has cognates. Even when I was learning Mandarin, I found there were ways I could get around certain words I didn't know. When I didn't know the word for president at the time, Obama was president. So I said Obama, and they understood what I meant. And even though I was talking about the president of Ireland, they kind of got my gist because I used the cognate of somebody's proper name. So there are shortcuts, but of course, those shortcuts only work for the initial stage. When you want to get to B2, then it becomes a lot less realistic, and you don't want to push yourself to something that's utterly impossible. So I've had projects where I've had to say, in this project, maybe B1 is what I'm much more likely to reach. I might still aim for B2 just in case, but I'll say at the start, it's probably not likely to happen, and I'll be as clear as I can about that.
So you've been traveling around Brazil for a little bit now. What's your favorite state so far?
They always give me this question. I can't pick a favorite state. It's like asking a mother who's her favorite son is, you know? There are so many things. Instead of saying my favorite state, there are so many things about Brazil that I love. There's parts of the culture. There's certain things that Brazilians do differently, the jeitinho brasileiro. The hygiene of Brazil is superior to every country in the world. The openness as a solo traveler to make friends, as long as I speak Portuguese, because I've been in lots of places where finding English speakers would be impossible. But I find it so easy to make friends here. Brazilians are extremely welcoming to foreigners, whereas I have not had that experience in other countries. As a foreigner, even a white guy, I've had challenges to find and make local friends. So Brazil has so many potency for that. And this is why I say without any hesitation that Brazil is my favorite country after 21 years of travel.
Hi, Benny. This might be a bit of a stupid question, although there isn't supposed to be such a thing. But how do you actually measure your English level? How do you say I'm B1, I'm B2? Do you have a standardized way of doing that or anything like that?
Are you familiar with the B1, B2 scale? I use the European Common Framework. So, but if before taking a test, the simplest way of scaling where I would be is rather than evaluating myself, because I come with my own biases, I could say, oh, I think I'm a B1, and that doesn't really mean anything. I would get a teacher through the likes of Italki or Preply who's familiar with the exam, and either have a mock exam or at least have a conversation with them for a half an hour. And then at the end, I'd ask them, what level do you think I am? And that for me is 90% likely to be true. It's not certified, like if I did a true exam, but just time with a native speaker and they will tell you. So that's the best way I would say.
Derek?
Oi, me pediram para perguntar em português, tudo bem? Eu tenho uma pergunta relacionada, bom, em primeiro lugar, obrigado pela palestra que você fez. Tem uma pergunta relacionada mais especificamente ao inglês, né? Mas gostaria que você contasse em geral como que o seu método de aprender idiomas se aplica para línguas que têm um status menos conhecido ou minoritário ou
Queria que você contasse um pouco disso, porque às vezes a dificuldade que a gente encontra há uma dificuldade de encontrar recursos ou de fazer imersão de fato, às vezes em grupos, né? Claro, você é irlandês, mas, por exemplo, eu tentando aprender também, por exemplo, tive dificuldade, ou às vezes tentando aprender até Esperanto, é difícil encontrar uma comunidade para fazer essa imersão do jeito que você fala. Então, eu queria que você contasse um pouco da diferença, se houve alguma diferença, se é a mesma coisa, quais são os desafios de aprender essas línguas menos faladas e que têm poucos recursos.
Então, às vezes é difícil achar recursos e achar essas comunidades, mas você pode criar as comunidades mesmas. Por exemplo, se você quisesse aprender o irlandês, poderia colocar no Twitter, não, mas nas redes sociais, e gente, eu quero aprender irlandês, alguém quer aprender comigo? E, na verdade, eu achei a aprendizagem de línguas no início muito difícil. Lá na Espanha, foi a primeira língua que eu aprendi, e os espanhóis, eles falam muito rápido. Eu achei que nunca ia aprender essa língua. Mas, quando comecei a falar com outros estrangeiros, eles me ajudaram muito, porque eu aprendi a maior parte do meu espanhol dos italianos e franceses e outras pessoas da Irlanda, da Inglaterra, que eles estavam aprendendo o espanhol também. Então, eu acho que não tem que aprender com nativos, não tem que achar recursos para nativos. Você só precisa de uma pessoa no mundo com quem pode falar. E achar essa pessoa pode ser difícil, mas eu acho que se não existe uma comunidade, você pode criar. Você pode decidir todo mês, o primeiro dia do mês, vamos nos encontrar nessa cafeteria para treinar o irlandês. E a primeira vez, segunda vez, você vai ficar sozinho. Mas a terceira vez, talvez vão chegar as pessoas. E a paciência para achar esses recursos. Mas, por exemplo, o irlandês tem 4 estações de rádio que você pode ouvir pela internet. Também tem séries que você pode assistir, tipo, como se fala, Bob Esponja, em português?
Bob Esponja.
Bob Esponja é traduzido ao irlandês. Você pode assistir no site dg4.ie. Também tem novelas em irlandês. E, como eu falei, as redes sociais. Se você procura no TikTok, tem muitos hashtags com o irlandês. E tem uma comunidade nesse site. Então, eu acho que qualquer língua, também as línguas menores, dá para aprender pela internet, dá para achar outras pessoas. Também não tem que ser pessoalmente. Você pode achar alguém pelo Zoom e tem muitos recursos para fazer isso.
Última pergunta agora.
Okay, so just one last question before we wrap this thing up, before we start the, network panel with Sabrisa. Well, I myself this question now. Having learned so many languages, what has been your most challenging language learning experience?
In all my
you would say?
in all my 21 years after diving into like Hungarian and Chinese and Korean, the hardest language I ever learned was Spanish. Because it was the first language. That was the language I went in and I would tell myself, you're an idiot. Why are you doing this? They're laughing at you. You'll never be able to roll your R. And I had no proof of concept. But after doing it once and learning, I have the power to do this, I can learn a language, and learning the methodology, knowing that, because in Spanish, I went to group classes and I was the worst student in the class. The teacher would constantly ask questions. ¿De dónde eres? See? I would always be that guy in the class who just wouldn't know how to answer the question. And so what I've learned is with time, I've gained confidence. And confidence is the greatest ingredient of all with language learning. And I did not have that confidence with Spanish. Most people, when I think about comparing languages, they're like, yeah, but the cognates or the conjugation of verbs or the tones in Chinese. And again, my philosophy is I don't care about those difficulties. I only care about what's easy. And at the start, I didn't have that philosophy, so Spanish was the hardest language because.
Pessoal, então agora é o coffee break. Obrigado.
E não se esqueça que às 5 horas a gente vai ter o nosso painel.